We are?
It's preparing to live stream the meeting.
Okay, so you can live stream directly from Zoom, huh? Yep. Excellent. One less problem.
Okay, it's preparing to live stream the meeting. We're live.
Hello, everybody.
Hey guys, thanks for joining. This is Essence of Science, the basics of genetics.
And I'm Dr. Abbasi live from Crookston, where we bring you some basic understanding of the science. And Amanda, did you have biology and science in the school?
Yeah, I remember
about genetics. What do they teach these days in the school about the genetic? What do you remember?
We focused a lot on recessive genes and dominant genes in the Punnett square. Is that what it's called?
Well, you see that there? I think schools are not doing a really good job to make genetic exciting enough.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know if it's really the school's fault that it wasn't exciting to me or my personal interests it doesn't align with.
Mm-hmm. So why do you think you should know more about genetic, Amanda?
I think genetics are important to know about because they're important to understand when picking a partner if you're planning on reproducing. And
it's actually funny the way you say that.
And I think it's also important to know about your own genetics because then you can kind of shape your diet in different ways and your lifestyle. Some people, I feel like, have more energy than others. Maybe it's because of their genetics.
Yeah. Now, what did you have for breakfast today?
Well, I was really busy all day. I had a late breakfast, early lunch. I had like a piece of bread that I made with
bread. Let's start with the bread. It's made of grain, right?
Yeah.
So do you think in nature that grain was the way you enjoyed it? You have the delicious bread today?
No, it definitely wasn't.
No, the natural grain actually have handful of corn, like 5 or 6. We have modified, we have practically selectively helped this genetic of the grain to be like it has few hundreds of much larger grain. And the interesting part is we did it all of that all before we knew what genetic really was. We were just doing that. When you go to a bar or a club and you're attracted to a person, that is genetic at work. When you have chickens, right?
Yeah.
Tell me about the chickens. What kind of chicken do you have?
I have 3 kinds of chickens. And they are very genetically different. I think they're bred for different reasons. 2 of my chickens have feathers on their feet, so they're not good for like wet weather.
Mm-hmm. But they give you an egg every day or every other day, correct?
Yeah, I get about 2 eggs a day.
Do you think naturally birds give an egg every day?
No, I actually just learned that they don't naturally give eggs every day because I've been wondering why I have a lot of wild turkeys around me. Like no matter where I go, there's always wild turkeys, and I've never seen a wild turkey egg.
Yeah, well, producing an egg is a very energy-intensive kind of thing. Imagine every day that animal has to give a percentage of her body weight, make it to an egg, and somebody like you comes and takes it. It is very energy-intensive, very actually difficult process, and very negative, has a lot of negative impact on the energy expenditure of the chicken itself.
Yeah, actually, I was just talking to my uncle about changing your chicken feed from the summer to your winter feed, because in the winter you need to give them more protein so they can stay warmer while they're producing these eggs.
Yeah, but this is genetic at work. We bred those chickens to give you an egg every other day. And you have a dog, right?
Mhm.
So, how big is your dog?
She's 10 pounds.
10 pounds, very small. Now, has sharp ears or floppy ears?
Floppy ears.
You know that with floppy ears in the nature is very detrimental to an animal, because with the ears that it's up and you can control, you can practically triangulate where a sound or a noise is coming from. That could be a matter of life and death for lots of animals. For that reason, you don't see any fox or wolves with floppy ears.
True.
They're disadvantaged and they die in nature. They literally starve or get eaten by another animal. Yet we have this lots of dogs that are different size, different shape, different color, but as well they have like many features that we call that. There's even a name for that, but the name translate from Latin to English is that they have childlike features. And we did that because we appreciate that. We human, we like that. And the way we do that, Charles Darwin already talked about it a long time ago, is that is practically, wouldn't call it a natural selection, but the human selection of the breeding. That's what the breeding is. That for us to put animals together that have feature that is useful to us, or we appreciate that. And this kind of breeding has been going on for thousands of years. Like every kind of apple you eat today is practically the consequence of us for thousands of years selecting certain kind of apple. Now, did you know that if you take the apple, a regular apple, and if you plant it, every seed in that apple will have a different kind of apple. In one apple, you take the seeds out and you plant them. Every single seed will create a different kind of apple tree. One that may be sour, one that is, and barely anyone that is really delicious the way you expected. All apple trees are more or less a clone of few different apple trees that we grow a tree, then we cut the tree, but we put a branch of a kind of apple tree that we like, and we practically clone it. Now, I'm mentioning few things, breeding, I'm mentioning cloning, and these are agriculture and practically methods that we have used for thousands of years. We know how it works before we knew how it works. A long time before we had any idea of how genetic works. So, and you talked about the recessive and dominant gene in the food. And do you know how we came to understand what the recessive and dominant genes are, what the genes are, and so on and so forth? Do you know the history behind that?
No, I don't. I actually, in science, I remember being really interested in that part because my mom has brown eyes and my dad has blue eyes. So I have blue eyes from my dad. But my brother Antonio, he has blue eyes and both of his parents have brown eyes.
Oh, that's interesting now. Now, brown eye and the blue eye, these are practically genes. And generally darker colors are more dominant, meaning that you always get that. Now, if both parents have dark eyes, how is it even possible that he has blue eyes? Do you know
because
how it works?
obviously my mom carries the blue eye gene. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gotten blue eyes from my dad because the brown is dominant. So that must mean my brother's dad also carries a recessive blue eye gene, and it just happened that way.
Yeah, and more or less it is that you get two genes for almost any trait from your parents, one from mother, one from parent, and there's a harmony in nature about how they interact together and makes a trait, a phenotype. We call that a phenotype. You get two alleles. Alleles are two parts of the gene, same gene in different kind of setups, like, one gene that says make the eyes blue, one gene that makes the eyes brown, and they both act, but practically the end result is that how these two genes interact with each other create an expression of the gene, which we call a phenotype. Now, we know about that through a very famous monk, actually. His name was Gregor Mendel. He was at that time, about 150 years ago, this information we have, all we acquired that after the Civil War, actually. Until Civil War, we had no idea. Well, we knew how planting and breeding works, but we didn't know the science of it. Gregor Mendel is a very interesting person. I think what's interesting about him is that he had access in a monastery to lots of peas. He grew peas, and he did something that not many people did before him. He said he's going to get the peas and just pay attention to one trait, like if it's what color they have or how smooth their surface of the pea is. Okay, and another thing important about him is he documented everything very, very nicely. So, and he did thousands of breeding. At that time, everybody knew that, if you have a pea and you want to pollinate, and we knew what pollens are, we knew that you need two kinds of plants. We even knew that these peas, they have something like a male part and a female part. And if you take the thing from the male part to female part, which pollens are actually, you can make them bear fruits. And we even knew how to do that. Like he used a brush to get the pollen from the male part to female part. He did something more. Peas have male and female part in one plant. He removed the female part of the pea so they don't, or the male part, so they don't pollinate themselves. So he truly
removed the male or the female part?
Well, in his experiment on the female plants, he literally removed the male part, and on the plant that he wanted to use the pollen, he removed the female part, so the plant wouldn't pollinate itself. So he could control an experiment, meaning that what he did, he took a brush and take from one plant that the female parts were removed and another plant that the male parts were removed, actually he did it very systematically. First, he took two peas that were both green and let them just pollinate against each other. By the way, the cross pollination, that comes a term that comes from him, and I'm going to explain how. So he let the green male, green female pollinate. Obviously, all the peas that comes out are green. He let the brown and the green pollinate, and all of them, brown and brown pollinate, all of them are brown. And he did brown and green, and then he did it thousands of times. And 3 or 4 times the peas were brown, 1 or 4 times the peas were green.
They were never like dark green or like kind of like a mix of brown and green?
And that's what it is, Sometimes one gene is not the codominant, meaning both genes works in harmony and gives something out. But his blessing was he was smart enough to choose characteristic that is one way or another. Because if it's not one way or another, it becomes harder to interpret the results. So what he noticed that exactly if you count it, it comes really close to 3 to 1. So, and in that sense, at that time, we didn't even have the science of statistics. We didn't know how to interpret the data. Imagine with these rudimentary tools and with the keen intellect, he figured out the only way this can work is that the parent have 2 sets of whatever thing is they give to their children, but they give only one of them to the children. And these two allele, what we call now, are our genes, our chromosome. Practically, you get one from your father, one from your mother, and your mother got two from her parent, and so on and so forth. But you get only one of them. And if one allele or gene is dominant to the other, so obviously if you get both the dominant gene, you have brown. If you get both, the recessive gene, the weaker gene, like green in this sense, you get the green piece. In your eye color, I would say both green eye gene give you a green eye, but there are three other combinations that you get both brown eye gene, or you get one brown eye and one green or blue eye gene from one parent or another parent. So 4 combinations. And that really reflects the 3-to-1, what Gregor Mendel found out about 150 years ago. And then, you know what's interesting? That all his knowledge was lost for almost 40 years, 30, 40 years.
Why was his knowledge lost?
Now, there was no internet then, I guess. He published it in one paper, and that one paper in the journal got printed hundreds of times, and that journals vanished in some libraries and so on. But around 1900, 120 years ago, that other people revived that. As a matter of fact, 3 groups in 3 countries worked on reviving in England, in America, and so on. And then they didn't, and another German group, but then they couldn't agree whose name they put on that. And then they knew that Mendel did that before them. So they called this science or this thing the Mendelian inheritance or Mendelian genetic, because Mendel did it 30 years before them almost, where it says practically you get 2 versions of any. They didn't know what the genes are or chromosomes are, but they practically knew that each person has 2 sets and one comes from each parent. But we still didn't know what it is, what comes from parent to you. Obviously, for a long time, we knew that sex has something to do with it. And it was obvious that is the sex, what makes the kid, is where you get the genetic information from your father that then in the mother, they come together, make a baby. And so whatever material it was has to be within that sexual transfer of genetic material. And it is amazing for me that for a very long time, we didn't know what that really is. Now, do you know when we found out what that material really is and how it works? Just about 70 years ago.
Wow.
That's it. Yeah. And in that time, 2 scientists, Watson and Crick, they were working actually in England. One of them is British, the other one is American, who actually was visiting there in England after the World War. And they found 2 very big molecules. They called the desoxy DNA, I have a brain freeze right now. RNA and DNA. Desoxynucleic acid, and the RNA is ribosomal. The ribosomal nucleotide acid. So, and that the reason is that one, they got it from the practically nucleus of the cell. The other one they got from the ribosomes, where proteins are built. We knew the cell, how it works, and so on. By then, we knew what the protein is made of, and so on. But the factory that built the protein has this long chain that they weren't protein. They were something completely different. And something very similar to that was as well in the nucleus of a cell as well. This long chain, it was even so long that if they would extract it, it would like a cross mesh kind of things, and it would make like a truly like a gel material. And the method to do that, actually extract the DNA, is so simple. You could do it in your kitchen. As a matter of fact,
so you spin it really fast?
No, it has nothing to do with spinning. You have to dissolve other stuff in the cell, and then you add a few things, including just regular bleach, I believe. And then that the material that remains becomes like a whitish, a very stretchy material, because it's made of long molecules, and it's very transparent. So when they analyzed that, they found out this very long molecule is made of few smaller molecules that repeat themselves, like a protein. Protein is the same. By the way, entire life is made of long molecules that they repeat themselves. Now, it's getting like a detective work now. It's getting really interesting. So they have this molecule, it's very long, and it's made of repeating segments. But when they analyzed it, contrary to protein, when they found out almost 19 or 20 different molecules that come together, they found out they are just made of 4 different segments. And these are practically a very special kind of sugar, a sugar that a molecule that has a very specific shape, and it has another part that attached to that sugar, and that we call that in chemistry, we call it ligand. And based on that ligand, this molecule have different behavior. One of the most important behavior of this molecule is 2 of these molecules like each other, and 2 others, and 2 of each hate each other. Like these 4, like 2 bodies and 2 enemies to each other. So, and the interesting part is here that we have a name for that based on that part that connect to that sugar molecule. We call them, you know how do we call them?
Protons?
Adenine, guanine, thymine,
No.
and cytosine. We call that ATGC.
Oh, I do remember learning about that in school, and A goes with T, G goes with C.
Exactly. That they have a shape, they really like to be together.
Mhm.
And C and G have a shape that they fit together, like they're good buddies. But A and C, they
repel.
Well, they just don't like each other. They just don't go together. Do you know what the result of that fantastic situation is? Is that if you make one strand of one of these molecules, and you pour all these little nucleic acids literally in a bath, on the other side, almost automatically, another strand get created that is mirror to the first one. And that is the magic of genetic, that you have a long molecule that can replicate itself in one way or another. Now, you remember we talked about the DNA and RNA?
Yeah.
The RNA has another, it doesn't have thymine, but it has another uracil. It's a different kind of nucleic acid, and that is the beauty of it. That's amazing. The DNA has a stable second, it makes a stable second complementary kind of strand. RNA, it can make a complementary strand, but that complementary strand is not strong enough to be attached to that all the time. It comes together, it goes, it builds it, and it separates and so on. So it is made for literally for a temporary kind of making another copy, but then going its own way. In a way, DNA strands are like married together forever, whereas the RNA is always looking for a one-night stand. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So, and that is actually something that just recently, in the last 10 years, we figured out. There is a good indication that life might have started as RNA, not as protein, not as DNA, that somehow 4.5 billion years ago, just randomly certain molecule of RNA came together, because RNA not only can replicate itself, but it can act like an enzyme. But then after a few 100 million years, there were molecules that do better job at being an enzyme, proteins, and there were better, more stable molecules to pass the information, DNA. And guess what? RNA is between the DNA and the protein. RNA is what get them information from the DNA and create protein in a structure in the cell that's called ribosome.
Is that where mRNA comes in?
Yes, messenger RNA. Messenger RNA is now when you create a protein, first your DNA separate. That is actually, DNA is so stable that it has to be, you have to spend energy for an enzyme to come in and separate those two strands of DNA. And then another molecule, another enzyme comes in and build an RNA that is complementary to that DNA. Guess what? That complementary RNA to that DNA, it's called messenger RNA, mRNA. By the way, if you have gotten your COVID shot, the COVID shot is a mRNA that take that information inside of your cell, then produces harmless piece of COVID virus that your body understand this doesn't belong there and start fighting it. So I'm always amazed when I look at this molecular level factory, which is our cell and how it works. And I'm always amazed how recent is most of our information that we have regarding how it works, how recent it is. Like, I'm going to tell you a story to make the genetic interesting for you, because everything I told you is probably very, very fascinating for somebody like me who's a nerd. But I'm going to tell you a story that makes you interested in that. Have you ever seen a fox?
Yeah.
Did you ever wanted to have a fox pet?
Actually, yeah, especially there's this type of fox called fennec fox, and they're so tiny. They're smaller than my dog.
And why don't we have pet fox?
Well, I think because they're a little bit too aggressive, but a
little bit.
I feel like you've told me before that they were breeding foxes or something to make them less aggressive, and that's how we got to dogs.
Yeah. So see, dogs are, we know genetically, all dogs today are a descendant from wolves.
And we're just breeding the nicest ones with the nicest ones over and over again to make nice home dogs.
Not necessarily the nicest one, but as well the most useful to human. As a matter of fact, dog can read human emotions.
I know that for sure.
Yeah, and that is a fact, as a matter of fact. But how did we get from a wolf who wants to eat you to a dog that knows when you're sad? How did we get from that? How long does it take to do that? How many generations do you think it'll take to make a wolf to a dog that can read your emotion and is willing to die for you?
I think 7.
No, it's a little more than that, but you're not that far off. We need more than 7 generations. Obviously, we did it in human history over thousands of years. But in 1950s in Russia, in Soviet Union, there was a group of fox breeders. They breed the fox for their skin.
The fur.
Yeah, for the fur. And somebody started doing a really interesting experiment there. And its experiment is very easy. They would walk in this farm, fox farm, and take the most timid, the most tame, the most friendly foxes, would take them and breed them. And then they would do over about 10 to 20 generations. So your 7th generation is not far off. They could create foxes that behave like dogs, like friendly. They come to you, they want to eat from your hand, they want to cuddle with you. But do you know what I think is the most fascinating of that is when they had those dogs or those fox that has traits like dogs, the ear become floppy. They had this different color in their skin. The tail become smaller. The eyes stayed bigger. Their mouth that was usually in the fox and all, dogs and wolves and so on, they come forward. They had some of these fox with flat, like childish looking fox that even as an adult, they have childlike future. And in just a few generations, which is practically nothing, they created fox that you could have as a pet like a dog. But nature needed thousands and human needed thousands and thousands of years. They created just over a few years with selective breeding of traits. So this...
Do people have these foxes now as pets, or was it just an experiment?
I'm sure they have. I'm not sure what they did, but there's another part of that as a contrary to that. And that part, I think it was really brutal because they did as well the other side. They took always the most aggressive fox and they breed the aggressive fox with each other as well. And they could show both traits, that tame and being wild and absolutely aggressive, you can breed both just by selective breeding based on, meaning that in nature, you have a variety. Obviously they didn't work on changing the genetic of these animals. Those traits, those genes, they were already there. That will take thousands of years, if not 100,000 or million of years. But this different kind of characteristic is in every animal, in all human, in all animals. Just by selectively looking and separating the traits in a group of fox, they could create a very tame and very, very aggressive dogs just over a few generations. So that comes very close to, how we have bred our dogs to be our friends.
That makes me wonder about humans, about nature versus nurture. If nice people, only like kind-hearted people reproduce with each other, is it still possible because the traits would still be there, like the characteristics are still there in the genetics, but then they have like a really evil child?
Yeah. Now, in nature, more or less, if there is any trait, any natural kind of tendency, it must be a use for that. Do you know if they would have put those nice fox in the nature,
they would not survive.
They would not survive. They can survive only in the captivity with human. And so, but there is a reason for them to exist, because if you are totally aggressive, like the other fox, that they made them really, really aggressive, they kill each other.
Yeah, so dogs are pack animals.
Yeah, nature likes a good middle ground. Mm-hmm. And then nature, though, tries always a little from both sides. A little more, they're friendly, a little less friendly. And nature kind of hone itself into where it works the best. So you have always different kind of tendencies. And nature sort of find out what works best in that situation. That situation can change. Like, obviously, in the wilderness, a tame the dog that you remember, I told you that your dog Lily is so friendly. If it goes and try to cuddle with a raccoon, it may not survive that.
I know.
Yeah,
I'd have to defend her.
Yeah, but and for that reason, this aggressiveness, anxiety, and so on is a trait that nature actually wants. I'm going to give you another example that, it's make totally sense, right? Eye color, hair color, skin color. Obviously, this is a genetic trait as well, right?
Yeah.
You know that you're blonde and white because your parents were blonde and white. And
Well, I'm blonde because I dye my hair blonde.
okay, yeah, or that, yeah. I'm a little ignorant about the the
No, I'm
habits
just
of,
kidding. I'm just kidding. I do get blonde from my family. Both of my parents are naturally blonde.
yeah. Now, but how many generations ago do you think we were all black from Africa? Because there's no question. Genetically, we are all from Africa, from a very distinct area that might be today's Kenya, Tanzania area in Africa. We were all black. How did we get other colors?
Well, I think my understanding is that we're black because of melanin, which is to protect our skin from the sun.
In
And
Africa, because you get a lot of sun there. If you don't protect yourself, you get sunburn, you get tumors, and so on. So those that were natural whiteys in Africa, when we were walking around naked,
you would not last.
They didn't last. They got the sunburn and they just
But
didn't
then
last.
as we moved up north, we didn't need it as much. So probably it just happened that way that we started losing the melanin in our skin, right?
Those genes, they were always there in some variation, that all the different colors that you see and some mutation on top of that and so on. But based literally, if you can draw a map, and they have done that, your skin color correspond to the amount of UV light you get in your geographic location. Obviously, when you go further north, you get less UV, then your your skin color is whiter. Guess what? There is another thing. If you go elevation high, like if you go to Nepal, you're dark. Why? Because in Nepal, it's higher in the elevation, there's not enough air to filter out UV radiation. And practically what happens is that you have to have more protection. Like you have heard, when you go skiing, you should put sun cream. In winter, when you go skiing, you should put sun cream to protect yourself against the UV radiation, otherwise you get sunburn. In a ski resort, in elevation, you get sunburn.
I thought that was also the reflection of the sun on the snow.
That is actually has more to do with how much at the elevation or where the UV light get to you, because most of the UV light doesn't get reflected. Like if you're behind your car, you don't get almost no UV radiation, because that UV of the sun get absorbed in the glass of your car. For that reason, you see my glasses here, they have something inside. The UV radiation makes them dark, but they never get dark in the car. Same way, obviously you have lots of light when you have snow, but not the UV part. The UV part get absorbed and doesn't get, but you have to protect yourself, because at higher elevation, there's less air to absorb the UV light of the sun, so you get sunburn. So literally the amount of the UV radiation in any geographic region correspond to the color of the people who live there forever.
Except and also, what thing?
This is a detective story and very interesting one. Except one thing, that if you take people from someplace in Africa or Australia or Asia or elevation and so on, the amount of the UV radiation you get correspond to their skin color. Except in Americas, the Native American, for the amount of the radiation they get, they are lighter. They are not as dark as they are in the Asia or Africa and so on. If you guess why that is, I buy you a box of chocolate. Why they can get the same amount of radiation in America, but not be as dark as in Africa or Asia.
Oh, I really want to get it.
Yeah, you can cheat. You can ask
cheat.
Misha. Ask Misha.
I'm the only one in here. Everyone left.
She's not there. Okay, so, well, I tell
Wait,
you.
no, is it because it's more flat?
No, not really, because it doesn't matter if they're flat or not. It has only to do something with the amount of the UV radiation you get.
Does it have anything to do with their diet?
Not really.
Then
No, it doesn't.
What is it?
Well, where did the Native American come from? And when?
I'm assuming Native Americans came
I'm
from
talking about the entire America, not only North America. I'm talking
oh
about
yeah,
North America,
I would say
Middle and
Central America.
No, they came from Siberia, from Asia, about 40,000 years ago. And we know these were very small group of people, and it was a land connection between Siberia and Alaska. And they came from Asian steppes or Asian area, and then they populated the entire America. So humanity, the America was the last place the humanity come to about 40,000 years ago. So what was the difference between the humans like 100,000 years ago and humans 30 and 40,000 years ago?
There's so many differences. I don't know what answer you're looking for.
But no, you just tell me anything. What is what we did 40,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, but we barely or never did 100 or 200,000 years ago?
I don't know.
Our clothing? Yeah, our clothing. Because those people who came to America, they already were clothed. They weren't walking around naked that UV radiation would select certain gene or not.
Okay.
We started modifying the nature already because we had clothes on that would protect us from sun. We still got darker. It still was a selection for darker skin with higher radiation, UV radiation, meaning further south, darker skin, and so on. But because we had clothes on, that penetration wasn't as strong as in Africa. Whereas if you get the same, like close to equator, in Africa, most of the people there are pitch black because they have to have lots of protection. Whereas in the same equator area in America, in South America, they are darker than the rest of the native people, but they are not as dark as people in Africa.
Okay, so that makes sense.
And nature is like a detective work, you know? And all of that based on 4 molecules that makes our genetic composition. Now, I'm not going to tell how those molecules works because this is a science, bottomless science. But I guess it is so much that we can learn from genetic. It's so much you learn on there's a benefit of that in your daily life. And you talked about choosing a partner, and that is not a trivial thing. You know, I know that my sister, we talked about that in one of our podcasts. They have an autistic child, and that is not clearly one autistic trait, but there are so many different other genetic problems.
I know there's a lot of testing going around right now for I think it's called the BRCA gene, where it's mostly affecting women with ovarian cancer and breast cancer. That gene if you have that gene, you're more likely to get breast cancer.
You know, there's a name for that. You know what we call that? When a gene doesn't make a problem or something, but it make you more likely compared to other people to have that. We call that predisposition in the genetic. Okay, so yes, we start to understand a lot of things that, you know, that certain genes or certain combination of genes predispose you to certain disease or traits. Like you can have 2 identical twins, you know, and one has something versus another, then usually the risks are very similar, but you can have the twins that are not identical, and then they are in the same situation. One of them get a disease, the other one doesn't.
Mhm.
Because based on their genetic composition, they are being different. One is more predisposed, even though they both get the same external kind of environment. They're both in the same circumstance, but one of them get a disease, the other one doesn't, based on the genetic predisposition. Now, I want to close this with one last thing, and that last thing is about, you asked about the nurture versus nature.
I feel like we can just brush over it, but I feel like that would be another good topic to just spend an hour on.
And
There's so much information.
Yeah, let's brush over it then. After Korean War, we got lots of kids from Korea, orphans, who came to US. At that time, it was first comes, first serve. They didn't look into your financial situation and so on and so forth. You wanted to have a child, wanted to adopt a child, and there were lots of them from Korea after Korean War. And so they did a very nice study about those kids who got adopted from Korea. Practically, they followed them up, and they divided the adoptive parent in college graduate versus non-college graduate. And then they compared these kids that are adopted by college graduate parent versus none, and they found out what is the difference between those kids that were in the parents' house with the college graduation versus not. Do you know what the difference was between those kids getting college graduation themselves compared to kids who were adopted in a non-college graduated parent home?
I'm assuming more kids that had college graduate parents focused on education more.
Yes, 18%. So if you get like
18 or 80?
18.
Okay.
So meaning that if you take 100 of those kids that were adopted, but by non-college graduated parents, and 100 of those people who got adopted by parents who were college graduated, those people who were in the college graduated homes, they had 18% more college graduation themselves. But the study didn't stop there. They as well looked at the biological children of those college graduated versus non-college graduated. The difference there was almost 80%.
Wow. So
in a way, that sort of answers that both of them, nurture and nature, do matter, but for that specific thing, it seems that nature managed to be more important than nurture. But that is just one study and one trait, meaning college graduation. I'm sure there are lots of other things that are in a different category. So, and this is us brushing over nurture versus nature.
Yeah.
I hope, I hope I could make genetic a little more, how do I say, intriguing for you and for people who listen to that, because I'm always excited about science. Science is practically a survival tool. Okay, we don't have to die because we have AIDS anymore. And that's what the science is. AIDS used to be a death sentence, not anymore. And the reason it's not a death sentence anymore is because of science. Our children don't die. It used to be that 70% of the children, they die before they get teenagers, in childhood disease and so on. It is so rare that our children die. This is not because anything but science. So I think science deserves one of the highest respect that we can give to any discipline, and because it has so much impact on our lives. So, and genetic is a big part of it.
I just have one more thing. I think another topic we can do should be genetic mutations. Because
Absolutely.
I've heard, and we can end here, but is it true that blue eyes are a genetic mutation caused by incest?
Blue eyes practically is a mutation of a gene becoming not functional. When a gene becomes less functional, meaning producing less melanin in certain area, all your colors go whiter. So in a way, white people are genetically deficient, weak, they have weaker genes in a way. But sometimes the weaker genes actually can come and help you. And we should stop here because if I get into that, I cannot stop. The reason humans are human and we have a big brain is because we had a muscle deficiency. We have a genetic deficiency of our chewing muscles. Mark that, because we should talk about that, how a genetic deficiency, a genetic mutation that make our chewing weaker, like a gorilla has like 10,000 times more cow chewing power than a human, 1,000 times more. They can break our bone. Okay.
Yeah, I've heard you can bite your finger off as easily as you can bite a carrot, but your brain doesn't let you because it knows it's your finger.
No, but that's different. I'm talking about a genetic defect that actually made our chewing muscle weaker, made our brain bigger. Let's come back to that.
We'll come back.
Okay.
Write it down.
For me, it's always a pleasure to give this information and make it interesting, make science interesting for our audience, because truly this is a detective work.
Yeah.
So from Crookston, this is Dr. Abbasi.
I'm Amanda Armagast. Thanks for joining us.
For the essence of science, the basic of genetics.